I'm your host of News Insight, Kang Mi-eun. Every week, we here on News Insight will delve into prominent issues, and we will be highlighting major issues in politics, economy, and culture in and out of Korea. Let's first meet our panel. On my left, Mr. Shin Sang-hyuk, professor at the Graduate School of Pan-Pacific International Studies at Kyunghee University.
Well, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yes.
On my right, Ms. Lee Young-eun, and she's professor in the Media Arts and Sciences at Korea National Open University. Nice meeting you.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, before we start off our main discussion, let's take a look at this week's 60-second news update.
Multiple terror attacks struck in at least 6 locations across Paris, the capital city of France, which resulted in around 129 deaths. The Sunni Muslims of the Islamic State group claimed responsibility for the carnage. President Park Geun-hye referred to terrorism as a cancer to world peace and declared that she would participate actively in combating terrorism. Korea is one of the biggest global players in the semiconductor, mobile phone, and display panel industry. Despite a slump in exports, LG Display has maintained its top spot in global large panel market for the 6th consecutive year. President Park Geun-hye attended the G20 Summit held in Antalya, Turkey. She focused on terrorism and the refugee crisis that were front and center of discussions with the leaders of the member countries. Now that the first written statement on political matters such as anti-terrorism and the refugee crisis has been issued by the G20, the role of the Economic Forum is expected to expand in the near future.
That was our 60-second news update for this week. We'll be focusing on the much talked about G20 Summit 2015 that garnered global attention. The G20 Summit is one of the world's largest economic forums, and not only they did cover economic agendas, but also they covered political issues that happened around the world, and also it includes the terrorism and refugees in the world. First of all, let's start with the question for Professor Shin Sang-hyuk.
Yes.
What are the main topics that were discussed in the G20 Summit this year?
Well, this summit started in the year 1999. So since the 1999, they have discussed about economic issues such as the global economic growth and the financial regulations and unemployment issues. And other the economic issues. But as you know very well, there was a terrorist attack in Paris, and this attack made the changes in the agenda of the 2015 G20 Summit. For the first time in the history of talk, they included the political issues such as terrorism and then refugee crisis from Syrians. So certainly this is a kind of big changes in the characteristics of the G20 Summit. If I added up something about the Korean President Park Geun-hye's the point which she delivered at the speech. Actually, she also outlined the economic structural reforms which Korean government has made, and also she introduced the plans to accommodate and promote creative industry. So actually, at this summit, they discussed the economic issues as well as political issues during the 2-day summit.
Yes, actually the Paris attack added some urgency in the G20 Summit. And I remember President Obama of the United States making a statement about the attacks. And he said, this is an attack not just on Paris, and this is not just an attack on the people of France, but this is an attack on the humanity and also the universal values that we share.
Once again, we've seen an outrageous attempt to terrorize innocent civilians. This is an attack not just on Paris, it's an attack not just on the people of France, but this is an attack on all of humanity and the universal values that we share.
So it is worth noting that the political issues were brought up in the G20 summit this year. And as an international economic summit, it seems that the impact of the G20 summit is becoming big enough to cover politics around the world. And I would like to listen to your opinions. First, would you like to tell us your opinion, Ms.
The G20 summit took place at the aftermath of the tragic Paris attacks. And so it was only natural, I mean, considering the magnitude of the impact of the tragedy, it was only natural that it become the center of debate. Of course, the migrant crisis in the Middle East was already one of the major topics that they were going to discuss, but this also raised concerns regarding security. When we talk about the global sort of political stratosphere, I don't think that we can separate economy and politics. I mean, they're not separate silos. They are inevitably interlinked. And so it is only natural that some aspect of politics will enter into the dialogue. But in terms of maybe taking actions, I don't think that the G20 summit is a place for that, unless something of this magnitude occurs.
Yeah. What is it, Professor Shin?
Yes, I think I fully agree with Professor Lee. The politics can be separated from the economics when we discuss about some international issues such as the Paris attack and the refugee crisis, Syrian refugee crisis. But I want to point out the other aspects, actually considering the economic size of the G20 member countries. As we know very well, their influences over the global economy has been understood as one of the largest ones. But as we discussed so far, this time at this summit, they included political issues. So I think considering their political influences, which is based on the economic power, the influences of G20 summit over the global community is expected to increase more, and it will be one of the most important forums which will be able to affect the very intensively over the global issues, I think.
Yes, I do agree, and we can see that President Obama was able to discuss the solution to this Middle East problem with President Putin of Russia, and they were able to agree on a joint front to solve this issue.
Since the leaders of the world gathered together at G20 Summit, it was natural for the leaders to talk about terrorism and refugee problems in the summit. And there also has been some worry about the backlash against the refugees and against the migrants. And the head of European Commission told the news conference that he's hoping that won't be the case. He said the attackers were criminals, not migrants. So these were important points that were mentioned in the summit itself. And Professor Shin, I believe there are still some limits to the G20 summit's increasing role. What do you think about this limit?
Well, yes, that's a very important point, I think. Actually, at this summit, the G20 leaders discussed how to defeat ISIS. And also they discussed how to accommodate refugees from Syria. But I think to find it out how to defeat ISIS and to accommodate refugees from Syria, both issues are both tactical and geopolitical challenges. What I mean is this. Well, in fact, there are many Kurdish terrorists, militia nearby in Syria or even in Turkey. And in dealing with the relations with this Kurdish militia, there are big differences in the stance between Turkish government and U.S. government. Well, there are YKK, which is the Kurdish separatist group, which they has claimed their independence from Turkey. And actually, both the Western allies and the Turkish government regarded them as one of terrorist group. But there's another Kurdish militia named YPG. They stand for People's Protection Units. Well, in the relationship with them, definitely we can find big differences. Turkish government has regarded them as one of the terrorist group, like to YKK. But the USA has used them as a source of information for their airstrike in the strategic targets in Syria. So they have maintained a relationship with the YPG. This is different from the stance of Turkish government. So as I explained before, well, there are some big differences in the stance between Turkish government and the Western allies, particularly US, in dealing with some same issues. So because of this kind of reasons, definitely they have some very serious difficulties in suggest the very detailed, concrete measures to deal with these issues. I think these challenges cannot be easily solved in the near future, I think.
Turkey seems to be the most important countries at the G20 Summit in terms of the refugee problems, because Turkey has over 2 million refugees from Syria. And at the G20 Summit, Turkey wanted to have some burden sharing with other countries. And the agenda was set even before the Paris attack.
Right.
The Turkish government wanted to discuss this matter. And the G20 Summit has significant impact on our country's diplomacy as well. And what is your opinion about that?
Well, definitely. This area has been regarded as one of the very important area geopolitically. At the moment, the Korean government also tried to expand and deepen the foreign relations with many countries. Well, in the economic sector, as you know very well, Korean government has been very actively sign on FTAs with many countries as many as possible. And in foreign relations, definitely, we have strengthened the relationship with the China and even the third world countries. In this context, the relationship with these countries seems to be very important for us to maximize our national interest. I think we don't have to exaggerate at this point. I mean, this cannot be exaggeration at all, because considering our situation facing the Korea, definitely to expand and deepen the relationship with these countries seems to be very necessary and seems to be very important for the future Korean national interest.
Right, yes, I agree with you. And Professor Lee Young-eun, and we'd like to focus more on the President Park Geun-hye's role in the G20 Summit. What did President Park Geun-hye talk about in the summit?
President Park focused mostly on buttressing the sustainability aspect. One of the most important propositions that South Korea made to the leaders of the summit was to create a fund for helping the development of the Northeast Asia region, of which North Korea is mostly a part of. And there was a proposal for the creation of a Northeast Asian Development Bank that would aid the development of infrastructure in the Northeast Asia region. And of course, in cooperation with other countries, and also in cooperation with the existing Asia Development Bank and the forthcoming Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Another thing that was mentioned was that Korea was willing to invest as much as $63 billion for that fund.
Well, she suggested one condition for the establishment of this bank. That was, if North Korea gives up their nuclear weapons development program, then this bank can be a kind of some good sources of, financial sources, which the North Korea needs a lot for their economy. So I think the President Park Geun-hye tried to use this opportunity to improve the relationship with North Korea. I think this is the very important point, which I want to add it up.
I would also like to point out that there was a moment in which President Park actually shined, because during the 2014 Brisbane G20 Summit, the leaders had set economic growth strategies. And this year, they were evaluating the extent to which each country had implemented those strategies, and Korea came in second.
Yes, but there are many other diplomatic issues as well as economic issues that brought up in the G20 summit, and those issues include the TPP or South China Sea, things like that. And President Park has already expressed Korea's interest in joining TPP during her trip to Washington last month. And there has been some widespread criticism of the country's hesitance to join TPP because it is US-led trade bloc. So we can think of the role of such multilateral diplomatic exchanges, including G20 summit, and the role will be increased even more. However, there are as many risks as there are benefits. So what do you think is the kind of strategy that South Korea could implement?
Well, I think a multilateral diplomatic exchanges seems to be a kind of global trend. So I think Korea, as we discussed before, has committed herself to strengthen the economic ties with many countries as many as possible. So in this context, I think we will have more of contact with the many countries around the world. But Korea is not does not have strongest influences in comparing with other larger countries. So we need a skill, we need a preparation to develop the best strategies. Well, somebody said that we have to keep arm's distance with China in order to maintain the very traditionally friendly relationship with the USA. But some others said, no, we have to take a more practical path to maximize our national interest. So considering all of these comments, yes, those comments can be made depending on the perspectives of individual experts. But I think that all this means can be summarized like this. We have to prepare well to make the best strategies to maximize our national interest.
Right.
It can be, well, in other words, should be well-balanced approaches, well-balanced the policies needed to maintain the good relationship with the countries as many possible in the world.
But we need, when we choose, I think there needs to be some sort of a consistency that
Right.
we need to set principles, and stick to those principles.
Right.
Yeah. Now let's move on to the second section, where we will be talking about media issues on the events that occurred in Korea. Ham, sausage, bacon, you can find these selections of processed meats in grocery stores and supermarkets. But recently, the World Health Organization, WHO, put processed meats in the same danger category as smoking and asbestos. The carcinogenic nature of this food is causing concern. This recent scandal has revealed how media outlets sensationalize news stories. Let's talk about ways in which the fundamental causes can be improved. Firstly, I would like to ask Professor Arirang a question. The issue on the safety of processed meat has continuously been raised in the past. And what did the recent processed meat controversy have? Why does this controversy have such a big impact?
Well, there are several reasons. One of the obvious ones is that the announcement was made by the World Health Organization, the group that is considered to be the most respected and to be one of the most highest authorities on health issues of a global nature. And it was not an individual study, it was a meta-study. And so past sort of individual studies, yes, caused some stir, but this announcement by WHO was a big issue. Now, that aside, the way in which the content was posed to the public, the fact that these processed meat is in the same category as tobacco in terms of reasons for causing cancer. I mean, that was one of the big issues. Now, they should have kind of tried to sort of define what a class 1 carcinogen is. I mean, not all carcinogens are created equal. There is tobacco, yes, and alcohol and asbestos, but sunlight is also there among hundreds of other substances. Yes, so just the fact that, yes, they have found a link does not mean how much of a link there is or the extent of what the extent of the link is.
So this is not the first time a food hazard issue has been blown out of proportion. I would say out of proportion. This is a topic that has been raised many times before. But why do you think some reports are continuously exaggerated?
Basically 2 reasons. One is, actually, it is intentional. Because
to make
of the
better story, interesting story.
Right, because of the clickbait problem. They want to get your attention. I mean, they want a sexy headline that will guarantee the reader or the viewer to click their stories. And so without any sort of explanation of the context, they just focus on that one aspect. Second is actually, I would describe it as a laziness of the journalists. Whenever they read a story like that, they should check the background. They should do more research rather than just copy and paste whatever is being sent to them. And so these days, I think we are seeing more and more of what we are calling sort of the abusing nature of the stories, and maybe that is the reason why there was this media frenzy over this issue.
Right. In the media, perception sometimes is more important than the reality, and the public opinion after the media reports something is more important in this case.
I think for my personal, point of view, the journals, the mass media does not take any responsibility of the outcomes which could be resulted from their reports. Particularly there is kind of some trends happening in Korea. When they report first to draw the attention, draw the interest from the people, they do regard this as one of the successful case. But if something wrong, I think I doubt whether how much responsibility they to take about the outcomes of the report. I think depending on the country, they have the different the culture or the practices. But I doubt regardless of where they are working at, definitely this is a kind of some common problems which mass media have, I think.
But unlike before, a counter-argument for this recent process-made controversy was raised quickly, and thanks to this quick response, the controversy was settled relatively easily. But this can be regarded as an exceptional case. We cannot see this many cases like this. How did this change come about, Professor Shin?
I think this case, according to the report, the food industries in U.S. prepare the counter surveys and the counter claims for the several months, for a long time. How they could prepare for such a kind of the counter claims or counter the surveys, because that they could get the information about the survey. According to the report, WTO conducted 800 cases to reach the final conclusion about this case. So I think unlike the other situation, the WTO has prepared quite for a long time to create this conclusion. So during this time, they could have enough time to, the relative industry, food industries could have enough time to prepare for counter the callings or counter surveys.
Right.
I think
the meat industry was preparing their responses even before the WHO study was released.
Yes.
And the meat industry argued that the WHO study was not original study. It was meta-study. WHO had a panel of researchers who looked at 800 different studies that tried to link cancer and processed meats. And WHO came to their own conclusion after considering 800 different studies.
Right.
And the meat industry, the response is kind of interesting. They go sort of further, saying that not only is meat safe, but it is an important part of balanced diet. So here, the most important thing is quantity.
Right.
How much do you consume
Right.
a processed meat?
Right.
And
plus,
for Korea, it's not much
Right.
problem for
And,
us, I think.
and plus these big economies that in which the meat industry is a major part of their economy produced quick responses. The ministers of the food department or food and health department of Germany, German's food and agriculture minister, and Austria's minister, both had immediate responses to the results of the study, saying that, for example, the German minister said, no one should be afraid when eating a bratwurst. I mean, Germans have their bratwursts, Italians have their prosciuttos, Austrians have their sausages. I mean, and of course, the meat industry itself in these countries is huge. Of course, the meat industry in the US is huge. And so these interest groups, these governments were able to come up with quick responses to the study. And I guess that's how the controversy kind of was able to be contained
Right.
relatively quickly.
This was an exceptional case because the meat industry provided a quick response to the WHO report. But I'm sure many wonder if we will be able to see more changes like this in the future. And Professor Lee, how should the exaggerated report on food be improved to prevent future recurrence?
There are several guidelines for reporting something like this. As I said, one of the things is to put the story in context. So emphasize the actual risks, the extent of the risks. Also, when you are citing percentages, I mean, compared to what? What percent of what, right? 18%, it seems like a lot, but when you see that it is only one person more than in 100, right? 6 to 7, that's the 18% increase. And so the use of percentages without context can also be misleading. And also, in terms of food and health, if it's a quick fix, or if it sounds too good to be true, you know, it actually probably is. So I guess eventually the burden lies with the audience and the reader.
And Professor Lee, thank you for giving such an important guidelines to the media when they report on food. Food is definitely a sensitive issue for many, as it can directly affect your health. There is a need for the media reports to be more cautious, careful, and accurate. The US Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has been giving provocative speeches since his campaign kicked off. He criticized South Korea for relying on the United States for defense without payment when it has plenty of money of its own. Let's go over the details to see what needs to be corrected to his argument about Korea's free riding on the US military. And he has been argued that South Korea is enjoying a free security ride on US taxpayers' money. But I think he might want to get his facts straight about this particular matter. First of all, to be clear, let's explore the facts surrounding Donald Trump's theory about Korea free riding on the US military. In fact, the Korean government is already paying about 1 trillion won each year to maintain the US presence in the Korean peninsula. And Donald Trump is oblivious to the fact that South Korean government is already sharing the cost of stationing US forces here. Is that right, Mr.?
Yes. Well, according to the special measures agreement signed by the Korea and USA the last January, well, Korean government paid the $860 million to the USA to share the cost for the deployment of the US troops on the Korean Peninsula in the year 2015. Well, actually, along with the payment, the Korea, from the deployment of troops on the Korean Peninsula, USA has gained the huge benefits. Second one is that actually Korea has been one of the largest buyers of the US military equipment. So on the back of the strategic alliances between Korea and US, definitely Korea has bought the huge amount of military equipment for the last several decades.
Yes.
And thirdly, I think this is the most important thing. Well, geographically, Korea is located at a very important place. As we know very well, the USA is competing with China in order to get the hegemonic power in the region. So to have, our strategic military post and then military camp on the Korean Peninsula, definitely USA can get the benefits from the deployment of the troops in the Korean Peninsula.
It is a widely held view that American military presence on the Korean Peninsula is also in line with the U.S. national interest.
Definitely.
Yeah, so why do you think, Professor Lee, that Donald Trump keeps making such allegations about South Korean defense strategy?
Last October, at a public appearance in New Hampshire, Mr. Trump was asked the question by a Harvard University student who said that Korea actually did contribute. And Mr. Trump's response was, it was peanuts.
South Korea paid $861 million.
Which is peanuts compared to what it's costing.
Yeah, but the United States also has geopolitical...
Excuse me. It's peanuts compared to what it's costing. It's peanuts.
And actually it was not, because the $861 million is almost half of the funds necessary for keeping the U.S. forces in Korea. And on top of that, use of land, use of facilities, Korea doesn't charge the U.S. Army for that, whereas Japan does, and that figures into their budget. It doesn't figure into our budget. And also relocating the American Army bases, the bulk of the cost of the relocation was taken up by the Korean government. And so in light of that, how could you call that peanuts? Well, one is, that's the Donald. That's what people call him, the Donald. That's the Donald. I mean, he's known for his sort of offensive, sometimes insulting expressions against opponents, criticizers, minorities. Oh, and the things he said about Mexican immigrants, I mean, calling them rapists even. I mean, it's just that flamboyant sort of attitude of Trump. I guess that's one. He doesn't care about political correctness. But the second aspect of that is actually his message that is actually getting to the hearts of some of the American people, more specifically the middle class, white American population. And his message seems to be America first. And in this age of economic difficulties, I mean, that message actually hits home to
Yeah. That's why some people in America say that he's not really a candidate, but he's a voice that people think of but cannot speak. And some people find it interesting and amusing and even delightful when he says things about things like that in flamboyant manner. But his remarks about foreign policy raise questions over his insight and legitimacy on foreign policy. So it is possible that the allegation was made because he had other intentions, not because he wasn't aware of the fact that Korea is paying for the US military. And some political analysts in America says that whatever he says about undocumented Mexican immigrants or South Korea, it's a strategy to draw more attention to his campaign. So why do you think he's keep making these allegations, Professor Shin?
Well, as you pointed out already, Mr. Trump is a candidate for the presidential election in the USA. So he wants to get more support and from the people. And then, as Professor Lee pointed out already, well, the middle-class white population, they have quite similar perspectives about the U.S. policy toward Korea, Japan, security policy toward Japan, Korea, and Germany. They think that, why we have spent such a lot of money for these countries. They are wealthy countries. But actually, I don't know whether they have enough information or not. But anyway, the fact is that there are some populations sharing same idea with the Mr. Trump's arguments. So definitely, to make a long story short, Mr. Trump want to use their support to keep the dynamism in his campaign for the presidency this year, I think.
Yeah. Some might say Trump's theory is just a minor opinion. But if somebody similar constantly refers to his arguments, there could be a greater misunderstanding between the two countries. And this was noted at the government inspection in Parliament as well. How should we respond to these kind of allegations?
We heard about the report about the Mr. Trump's the argument about this issue. We heard about there was the 8 Korean American students who raised a question to him about this issue. He strongly and clearly explained and pointed out that his argument is not correct. So I think that the Korean government should take use of this situation. Students, we have to learn something from him. The Korean government use every chances to make it explain very clearly that's not true, and we have to explain the U.S. and for the U.S. and for the Korea, this is win-win strategies. And we have to make it clear that USA also have gained huge benefits from their military existence in the Korean Peninsula, not only for the Korean.
Right.
So we have to use every more opportunities to make it clear in the international arena, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Let's be clear that the favors do not play any part in the South Korean and U.S. alliance, but rather it is a mutual cooperation. Okay, that was a wrap for our first episode of News Inside. How did it feel to be on the show for the first time, Professor Shin?
First of all, I enjoyed a lot, and then I wish this program could help the viewers have clear understanding about the newses. Domestic issues, domestic newses, as well as international newses.
Yeah. Professor Lee, how did you feel about being on the show?
Agree. I think it was a great opportunity to give the viewers a sort of an in-depth look at the news from a Korean point of view. And so not just the domestic audience, but I think it will be a great opportunity to give the international audience a better look at the issues from a Korean perspective.
Yes, thank you. I hope this show would be an opportunity to express the Korean perspectives as regard to the international issues in the world. Join us, viewers, for another weekly news episode of News Inside next week. Thank you for watching.